way I could text Laura or RC too.
Okay, we're live on YouTube now. Sandy, should I let people in?
Let me just finish this text to RC to contact Sarah. Okay, thanks. We'll get started in just a minute. So that everybody have a chance to join the meeting. Welcome, everyone. Just going to wait a couple minutes for a couple more people to join the meeting that we're expecting, and then we can get started. Thank you for your patience. If you wanted to submit any questions for our hosts or our presenters this evening, there's a link on the chat that you can click on and submit the questions, and then I'll read them to our presenters. So if you go in the chat, you can see that. I'm going to start off by introducing Armando. Armando is our Spanish interpreter extraordinaire who joins us for every meeting. Thank you, Armando.
Thank you.
Armando will let you know how to sign in for the Spanish interpretation.
Muy buenas tardes, yo soy Armando Ramírez, voy a ser el intérprete para esta reunión de esta noche. Si necesita interpretación en español, en la parte de abajo de la pantalla va a haber un globo. Si hace clic en este globo, le va a dar la opción de entrar a interpretación en español. Haga clic en el idioma español y lo va a llevar al salón donde yo le voy a estar interpretando a usted con mucho gusto. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Armando. Okay, tonight is February 22nd, Tuesday, 2022 at 7 p.m., well, 7:04, and this is the San Mateo High School PTO General Meeting. Welcome, everybody. This meeting is recorded, and it will be on our YouTube channel, which you'll find on our website. All of our presentations are actually on our YouTube channel, so if there's anything in the past you might have missed, please feel free to go back to our website and take a look at that YouTube channel. I have one announcement to make. So the San Mateo High School PTO Executive Board is looking for people to take positions on our board for the next school year, 2022-2023. It's a critical piece of our school community. We support our students, teachers, and parents in so many ways through programs, through communications, various events offered on campus, awarding our students and our faculty. Anyway, we're looking for people to join our board, and I'm going to put in the chat the email addresses of people you can contact to, if you're interested, or if you have any questions, please feel free. Even if you want to volunteer and ask more questions about what does the PTO do, please feel free. Okay, next, I'd like to introduce our presenters for this evening. We have Steve Hansen and Sarah Cowie. Steve Hansen is our financial aid advisor here at San Mateo High School. He's for the college financial aid advisor. And Sarah Cowie is our leadership teacher. And tonight we're going to be talking about what colleges are looking for beyond grades and what students can get involved in with at school that could be interesting, that would help them build that well-rounded student that all these colleges are looking for. Steve, thank you.
Awesome. My pleasure. First, happy palindrome evening, everyone. Got to mention that. Nice day that's going on today. But yes, I'm excited to be back here. I'm going to go first. Those of you who saw me talk last month, I'm going to kind of elaborate a little bit further on some of the stuff. I won't be taking as much of your time because Sarah Cowie will be jumping in later, and then I'll be around for questions at the end. So I know when I was contacted for this, I was asked a lot about definitely concern that parents have about their students getting to the best schools and how to be the most well-rounded student that they possibly can be. So today's talk is meant to kind of just build off of that a little bit from some of the stuff we talked about last month. Just real quick, a slide on a recap though, for anyone who maybe didn't see last month's talk or didn't get to go watch the video. Last time we kind of talked about two of the big things that kind of really motivate the way I work with students and what I try to guide them towards, and it's big takeaways. I think definitely I love to help students find authenticity in the process. And what I mean by that is when we're talking about opportunities such as the ones that come up later on in this slide deck, we don't want I don't feel like students should be signing up for volunteer opportunities or clubs just based on what they think a particular school wants. I really want to see them signing up for things that are of a strong interest to themselves and really fit where their passions lie. Because when people do that, then they're going to be more inclined to follow through with that commitment, be very heavily involved, which can open up so many doors later on. And one such door it can open up is, in my opinion, leading to a more appropriate fit for that student when it comes to finding the right college for them. It's about making sure they find the opportunity where they can most likely thrive and succeed. And when you're being yourself in the process, those are the kinds of schools going to be more likely to accept you. So if you take a moment though, think in your mind what you think is the best college within the US. And obviously it's an opinion question. We polled everyone in the room. We might get a variety of answers. Probably one of the more common ones that come up might be your alma mater. If that's not the one that immediately leaps to mind, then when this question gets asked, people usually think by default of one of the more selective schools in the country. So they might default to an Ivy League school, Stanford, one of our harder to get into UCs. And certainly, they are all really good schools. Is it the best? I think best is kind of subjective and it depends on the individual. For me, a best school is that right fit school for a student. But one thing I kind of want people to think about when they're thinking about best schools, right schools, things like that, even if whatever you envisioned to be the best school out there, if your child does get it and go to that school, that best school is only as good as your child chooses to take advantage of that opportunity in that space. As an example, when you all were picking the right high school for your students, some of you might just pick San Mateo, maybe it's closest to where you live. Some of you may have shopped around to other schools in our district, considered Mills, Burlingame, Hillsdale, the others, based upon what you felt might have been the best fit for your students' interest levels. If you have a student who loves drama, that might have tilted you here. If you have a student who is most concerned with being on a top athletic team, you might have looked at which school had the best for that particular sport. But a lot of that was ultimately done for most parents with the goal of making sure your child went to a high school where they could not just get good grades, but really thrive and succeed to best position themselves to put their best foot forward to college and go on to a school that they would be happy at, a school that's the best and a good school for them. So even if a student goes to the best college, if they don't take advantage of the opportunities, they're kind of wasting that opportunity. So they really need to be getting involved in their college campus. So the way they get involved there, if they are getting involved in high school, looking for these clubs and activities, it is also having a second goal of preparing them to know how to, when they get to college, take the initiative to find their home, to find what clubs and activities they're most comfortable with, and then hopefully succeed in those particular organizations, getting new leadership skills, things that will best position them to, after college, maybe go into the job market or potentially look at a master's program, whatever their individual goal might be. In my opinion, I think there's only one time where the exact name of your school might make a difference when it comes to job applications or interviews. And it is, in my opinion, something that's completely out of your control. If you happen to go on a job interview with somebody who went to the same school you did, or they have some other strong emotional connection to that school, maybe their significant other went there. Maybe you went to a big sports school, they are fans of that team. Maybe they grew up near that school. Then of course that might give you something extra to bond over in the job interview process that might help you stick out, even if maybe other aspects of your resume or the interview were not as on par with some of the other applicants. But outside that, it's less important where you went and what you do when you are at college. So as far as the things that contribute towards making a student well-rounded, grades I put at the top here, I think it's something we can all agree on. Many schools are going to give grades the highest weight. There are numerous other things that you're going to see on this list that contribute to making a student well-rounded for their application. Now, within those things, there's no proper list rather for how they are prioritized. It'll vary college to college if they even necessarily prefer one over the other. Many of them are going to kind of take what's called a holistic review and look over your application and factor in everything that's on there, kind of see how they weigh together, what overall cumulative story they tell. So I say that as we're talking about things, and a couple slides coming up, I'm going to talk about examples of these things. Mostly broad examples. Ms. Cowie, when she jumps in, can talk about examples specifically at San Mateo High School for ways you can get involved. We're going to talk about some examples of things that count for these, but schools are not necessarily expecting a student to have every single one of these. Not everyone's schedule is going to fit that way. So it's about kind of prioritizing what's most important to you. Colleges, as we said last time, they're not looking for one student who can do it all. The person that can do 20 clubs and do them all well is few and very far between. So when they have these big club days at the start of their fall semesters, kicking off the school year, they're not expecting in college that you're going to come in and sign up for like half the tables there. They want you to walk around, see the tables, find the ones that really fit the interests that you've been able to craft and develop over time. They're not, with a shout out to a fellow New Jerseyan, Danny DeVito, they're not looking for somebody who is single-handedly the Renaissance person that can literally do every single thing. It's an underrated film. So a quote that I cannot take credit for, I saw it on the internet, but actually kind of applied well, I think, here when we're talking about extracurriculars. Don't think of it so much as being well-rounded. Think of it almost being like lopsided. So now I feel like if you do 10 things tangentially, but maybe finding those 2 or 3 things that you can do really well with a heavy level of good involvement. When it comes to extracurriculars, of course, there are some more traditional examples that we think of. Certainly getting involved with athletics, and it doesn't have to be San Mateo athletics. There are students who get involved in local rec leagues, club sports, things like that. That's totally fine. It still counts as involvement in something beyond what is required of your school day. Volunteering, I think everyone knows that's extracurricular. One thing that I love about the way we do things here, sometimes we have freshmen come in, they're not sure what's required and what's not, and they might ask me or Ms. Kane, who sits over there, what is our requirement for graduating for volunteer hours? And we have none, which I think it actually plays better for students. If we had, hypothetically speaking, a requirement that you do 20 hours of volunteer work, then a student who does 20 hours, maybe a small higher number of 22, 23, it doesn't really stand out on an application the way it would for a student who goes here where we have no requirement and they do whatever number of hours they do. Anything is already above and beyond the minimum requirement. So to me, I think it's great that we don't make a requirement. We have a culture that definitely encourages it, provides the opportunities, but I love the fact that we don't make it a requirement. There are some other ways people have extracurricular activities under the belt they may not think of. Employment, babysitting, or helping at home. Colleges are totally reasonable understanding. Like when they're looking at your application, especially under these holistic reviews, they're taking everything into account. They know that some families have circumstances where a student will go to school all day, have to come back and maybe contribute 6 to 7 hours of childcare, child rearing, or help around the house before they then sit down at probably 10 o'clock at night to start their homework for the day and getting themselves up early next day for school. So they certainly don't expect that student to somehow find a way to also be the president of a club. Anything that's kind of beyond your academic minimum requirements can count as an extracurricular activity. And if there's something that interests you, but you don't necessarily know an appropriate outlet for that, maybe there's no club that exists here or easily found in the community or anything like that, you can start your own club. There is a process for that here. I don't know all the ins and outs. That'd be a Miss Kelly question later on when she gets here. But we've had students through the years start their own clubs, and it is a great way for a student to show more initiative too later on when they're applying. Sometimes students will choose to get involved in internships. And on the screen here, you're going to see some common examples of where an internship might be found. Again, I would try and encourage people to try to find one that's a good fit with your interest if you are able to do so. Now, internships, I'll admit, are not always the easiest thing to find in certain fields, especially in the last 2 years with all that's been going on in the world with COVID and all that. But students, I definitely encourage them, if they're not readily finding one that's in their interest level, think about, in an ideal world, if they could intern anywhere, where would they be interested in doing that? Like what companies interest them? What maybe professors doing different types of research might be of interest to them? And I would encourage students to then maybe work on creating a resume and reaching out to these organizations and introducing themselves, who they are, their interest level, and seeing if they might be able to accommodate them for an internship over the summer, throughout the year, whenever it's most appropriate for that student's schedule. And it can be hard to just hit the pavement with unsolicited messages. You might send 40 messages, get 37 no responses, 2 no's, and one that says, all right, let's talk a little further. So it does take a little bit of diligence on that part. But again, it's another great way. It's a student is making their own opportunities, stuff that colleges like to see, because it also shows what's the word I'm for here, a drive and a determination and a go-getterness that can translate as well into college success. When you're doing employment and volunteering, things like that, for volunteering, ideally, if you can, try to find something in a topic that interests you. When it comes to work, there is no one quote unquote right job you must have. Obviously, we would love to have jobs and things that interest us. But if a student is super interested, in a field that's only going to bring in people that already have the advanced degrees, maybe they can't get a part-time job like that. Maybe because of scheduling necessities or the need for acquiring or contributing money at home. A student might have to work 15 to 20 hours per week right after school on the weekends, and they don't have a choice but to take a job at a local restaurant or something that's not necessarily on their interest, but is necessary for the home survival, for the family well-being and things like that. So in a case like that, it's totally fine. They're not saying only certain jobs count. But again, feel free to please list it on your application as an additional extracurricular. And it doesn't matter what your motivation for a job is. It could be your parents say, hey, we're not giving you social spending money. You have to earn that yourself. So my folks said when I turned 16, so I got a job. Either way, it's still showing that you are committed and that they can count on you, that if you say you're going to do something, you follow through on it. So there's a lot that goes into it. I know we weren't going to main crux of tonight is not necessarily grades, but I do want to touch on that for just a slide or two as well, because I know that definitely kind of weighs on people a lot. They get concerned about which classes they should take and shouldn't take. And obviously a lot of that, as far as which class one should take or not, is very much an individualized answer. It's harder to give broad questions as far as, or broad answers about you must take this, must take that beyond requirements. But we can talk about some things that might be a little bit of a guidance. I know a lot of students sometimes go into this process feeling like they have to start taking all these summer math classes, for example, between 8th and 9th grade, and start off with geometry or algebra 2, and try to work their way through. So they're taking calculus senior year. And there definitely are some students that can thrive with that. But sometimes the students who aren't even interested in a math or a science major, where calculus isn't even going to really tie in neatly to what they're doing. So definitely, a big part of it, I think when it comes to academics, is trying to understand what's most appropriate for an individual and understanding your limits in the process. Colleges realize that it's not, the typical student cannot take 6 APs and do well in every single one of them. It's better to know your limits going through the process and try to take courses that fit that, as opposed to trying to sign up for every AP and advanced rigorous course one could, and then getting to a situation where senior year comes and you start to see grades that are coming in much lower than what you've done in the past, or having a situation where I've taken on too much, I need to drop a course for spring semester. Certainly when that happens, we'll of course work with the student to figure out how they can best relay that to the colleges. But if you try not to overstretch yourself and the limits of what you can handle, that's why I like to see students when they're taking APs or college courses outside here, don't go from 0 to 50 out of nowhere, add a little bit at a time, and you begin to see how much you feel you can handle. At the end of the day, I feel like for a student applying to college, again, it's a holistic review. They'll look at the SAAs, letters of rec. There could be individual students that are exceptions to this advice, but in general, I see, if a student doing less APs well is going to be better served by a student who's trying to do a large amount and struggling through the process. Especially if they're doing that large amount, it's probably going to start impacting their ability to stay involved well with the clubs that they have decided to invest their time and energy to. And Mr. Holt suggested putting this in here as well for y'all. If you're worried about when you're applying to college, how do they understand the context of our school, what opportunities were available to students, which opportunities were not, things like that. With all the applications that get sent in to schools that require basically everything except UCs and CSUs, they don't ask for this, but they get it through other means because they're a state school. But for every other school, we send in what's called the school profile. It's a 2-page document, so a front and a back. And it kind of just relays a little bit of key things that a college should know about San Mateo High School, such as which APs are offered, general guidelines we try to give students about when they should take a certain number of APs, when they want to expand that. We mentioned this will be relevant for another year or two until we start having students who were not in high school during the pandemic. We mentioned, for example, on here, what happened spring 2020 grades. We mentioned on here the virtual year and things like that. None of this is like a secret in-house document. This is actually on the school website. This is completely public information as well. So nothing I'm showing you is like confidential or anything like that. And that's kind of just a little bit of a broad overview that I brought here. I want to make sure I leave plenty of time for Ms. Cowie as well, and then your questions afterwards. So yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. We actually have some extra time. It seems Sarah has either been held up or she has not joined us this evening yet. So I can move on to some questions that have been submitted. But I'd just like to tie into what Steve said about don't pile on too many APs, because I think what colleges, from what I've learned from my oldest student, who's now in college, and my current one who's looking at colleges, is really what they look for is consistency. They really want to see consistency, that you're doing well at the level that you're going at. And that's what's important. Like, don't go really hard out taking all these APs and then your senior year flake out, because even if you get accepted, if you flake out at the end, they can drop you. So that's something to keep in mind. You want to make sure your student is engaged for all 4 years at the level that they're happy at and comfortable at.
Really well said. Thank you. Yeah, for sure.
So I'm going to go into the questions. And also, if anybody has any questions they want to submit, look in our chat. There's a link there that you can click on and send in any questions that you might have. Our first question of the evening is, how important are extracurricular activities to colleges as compared to grades and standardized test scores?
Good question. In general, again, holistic reviews, so they'll take individuals into account, but in general, grades are going to be the most important thing they want to look at. They want to see that the courses you're taking, that you do well. Even a course that's not related to your major, like you could be interested in art, want to go to an art school, but they still care that you at least did well in English because while it may not tie in perfectly to your major, it still was a requirement. So they want to see that you still took it seriously and didn't try to blow it off or anything. As far as test scores and extracurriculars, not every school is requiring test scores. Some are test optional. So, vary a little bit site to site for sure. But a lot of schools, the ones that do holistic reviews, I think more often than not are going to give definitely a good amount of weight towards your extracurriculars and level of involvement for sure.
Okay. Our next question is regarding GPA. Isn't GPA a big part of college acceptances? And since APs lead to a GPA bump, should students try to make as many APs as possible?
That's a great question. And certainly, yes, APs do lead to a grade bump. And I will say most colleges, when they're reviewing an applicant, they're going to recalculate GPA based on whatever their individual standard is. So we might say a senior's applying has a weighted GPA of like 4.18, something like that. It doesn't mean that school will give that student a 4.18. They might not count certain classes that they don't consider a core subject. Some colleges don't give extra weight to their APs. I would say more will than won't. Now, if academic studies say existed in a vacuum of any other responsibilities, you're right. In theory, just loading up an APs and doing well in all of them would be tremendous for a student. But the reality is when you factor in that students should be staying involved with some extracurriculars, we want them to sleep and take care of themselves as well, hopefully work out a little bit here and there too. There's only so much time in the day, and it becomes something that when students stretch themselves too far in the APs, it can lead to challenges in maintaining their grades elsewhere. It can lead to challenges in being actively involved in clubs as well. So that's a big reason why, I don't want to see people stretching themselves too far on APs either. If you are interested in taking additional rigorous courses, but you're afraid of where they fit into in the terms of the school day, students can sign up for community college classes for free over their summers. So that might be something where if they want to take some extra courses without pushing their mental health possibly too far, that can be a nice way to achieve that balance.
Sorry, I'm having trouble unmuting myself there. Thank you, Steve. Okay, our next question is, if a school is test optional, are you at a disadvantage if you don't submit scores?
So in general, the way it works is, I wouldn't say it as a disadvantage. When schools are test optional, the way it usually works is that if you submit a test score that is generally around the average or higher of what they see for their scores for admitted students, then it works as kind of like a positive for you. You can think of it almost like, if they were to make your application a score, a decent test score can be like extra points, but they're not deducting from your application for lack of a score, if that makes sense.
Okay. Do those summer community college classes count towards your San Mateo High School GPA? If so, do they count as a GPA bump?
There are some community college classes that do count for a bump. Usually it's only a course that's dual enrollment. So that's going to be a course where the nature of the course is one that it appears on our transcript. Most courses a student just takes on their own over the summer at community college, under most circumstances, will not appear on our transcript. But even though it may not necessarily bump your San Mateo High School GPA, when the college is recalculated, many of them will take that college course into consideration, and they will, in many cases on their own math, acknowledge that it is a course that is generally going to be a bit harder and more challenging than your high school course would be. So they would see the academic rigor come through, even if it may technically have zero impact on your direct SMHS GPA.
Well, and oftentimes those college courses too will transfer into the school that you're going to, as well as the AP courses. Every school is a little bit different. Some require you to score a 5 or a 4 to get that college credit. But I know several students who've had the opportunity to go in as a sophomore because of AP courses and because of taking college courses over the summer.
That's a great point as well. Yeah, because even if exactly, because even if it's not impacting GPA here, many times you will get those credits later on. So it definitely has other advantages too.
It does. And I just like to say that I know so many families just imagine their students going to these really big colleges like Caltech and Stanford. And a lot of those schools don't take your AP courses or the college credit. You go in as a freshman. Whereas if you go into UC or a state, they'll take that credit and you're going in with those credits and you have 3 years of education left. So that's really something to think about too. Because school is expensive.
Yeah, like I cannot sing the praises enough about the public school system we have in California, whether you're doing UC, CSU, or starting community college. They do try really hard with help from state legislatures too, to try to make it reasonably priced, at least relative to other colleges, depending on, if you went to college 30 years ago, it may not seem reasonably priced, but at least reasonable to other opportunities out there. California is really committed to education and putting their money where their mouth is on that.
Yeah, it's true. California is a good place for college. I'm a San Jose State person myself. Okay, our next question is, how important are teacher recommendations? Is it as important as grades or more important than extracurriculars?
Good question. So in my opinion, almost nothing is going to be more important than grades. Grades do carry one of the highest weights, but letters of rec do carry a lot of significance for for the schools that request them or require them. So UC, CSUs are not going to need letters of rec, but if you're applying to private schools, many of them will. Several out of state publics will take letters of rec. As far as if it matters more than extracurriculars, again, a lot of schools going to vary case by case. They do their holistic reviews. A lot of it's just kind of all working together. It's not necessarily that one is substantially better than the other. An application lacking one, that might be telling, but again, unless there's extenuating circumstances, for the individual.
Yes. And your junior year is the best year to figure out who will be getting you those letters of recommendation. Just wanted to put that in there. Okay, next question. Is there a limit to the number of AP classes you can take at San Mateo High School?
So officially speaking, no. There was a year where we did have that. People didn't like that. So there's officially speaking no limit. There is some strong guidance about recommended limits. There's a practical limit in that there's only so many class periods a day. Certain APs are not offered all 7 periods of the day. And there are times where we have more students interested in an AP course than we have space for. So sometimes that can come into play. And we do, on that school profile I showed you, we do share with colleges, but we recommend as a limit as well, so that if they see a student's not taking 5 APs, they're not going to wonder why is the student not taking it. They'll see that that's very much in line with the types of guidance that we provide our students.
A lot of stress taking 5 APs.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine trying to balance all that.
5 APs in a college course. Casita did that her senior year. She cried.
It was a stressful run for her, but it worked out. It was stressful getting there. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it for anybody. If you don't do well on an AP test, should you submit that score to your college apps? If you leave it off, won't it look weird? Won't colleges assume you did bad on the AP exam if you don't submit your AP test score?
In general, colleges are more concerned with what you do over the course of the whole school year for that AP class. They want to see, how you do through the continued body of work, as opposed to the one day of standalone testing that can't be made up. Like, at least in the past, when like SATs and ACTs were more of a requirement, you had other opportunities to sign up if you woke up like violently ill on the day of the test. AP didn't quite function that way. So they're looking more at how you do in that course. There are a few applications that will invite you to put your grade if you wish to share it on the not class grade, sorry, score. But in general, they're not going to look at a lack of omission or an omission and assume you must have gotten like a 1 or a 2. And even if you did report a 2, that's not, for most schools out there, that's not going to be the thing that's being weighed into the equation.
Okay, that's good to know. Aren't the California public schools, UCs and CSUs, overcrowded? I've heard horror stories about students not being able to get into classes or having housing issues.
They are. I don't know if they're all. I don't think they're all at capacity, but many are. CSUs have probably definitely less campuses, I think, that are at capacity, but there are both systems dealing with a lot of those issues. And that's why it is admittingly, yes, maybe contradicting myself because of how California loves education, tries to put money behind it, but it is hard in the UC and CSU system to get done in 4 years for many students because of how hard it can be sometimes to get the classes they need, things like that. So it is often coming down to 4.5 years for a lot of students, sometimes 5. Housing, I work with students going from senior year of high school to freshman year of college. I haven't had a situation with a student going to freshman year unable to get housing. Colleges, even really crowded ones, will generally make it, even though they might be low priority for the highest quality housing on campus, freshmen will often get a higher priority because they know it's not as easy for them to just go commute from somewhere off campus. It wouldn't surprise me if some students are finding their 3rd, 4th year that staying on campus is not as feasible in some cases.
Okay. Once again, I just want to remind everybody that you can submit questions if you go in the chat. There's a link to submit questions, so feel free to submit questions. Our next question is, some private schools limit the number of colleges any one student can apply to. So these are private high schools. So some private high schools limit the number of colleges any one student can apply to. Does San Mateo High School have a limit? And how many colleges do most students apply to?
Good question. We don't have a limit. I'm actually not even sure legally if we want to have one. If we could, private school would be a different story, but we don't have a limit. In terms of the typical number, though, I'd say probably the average student applies to maybe just a little over 10, but you got to keep in mind in a lot of those cases, the student might have multiple UCs, multiple CSUs. So while it's multiple applications in terms of the fee you pay, it's just one application you fill out. So like you might have theoretically 15 schools you're applying to, but if 5 are UCs, 5 are CSUs, and then 5 other randoms, that's only 7 applications you filled out, not 15 different ones. You still
Okay.
pay for 15, of course, but yeah.
Oh, that's you've given us a lot to think about. Let me see if we've got any more questions. Will San Mateo High School counselors give help with writing college essays?
Yeah, so some of the things we've done in years past that I would imagine we'll still do going forward. Actually, I mean, with my counterparts earlier today, we're looking to schedule later this semester virtual presentations district-wide geared towards juniors from a Common App school rep, a separate one from a UC rep to talk about the respective essays and personal insight questions and provide guidance there. I know our English teachers senior year incorporated into their lessons early in the school year, but having students write some of their sample essays and personal insights, so they're getting practice in there. And then students can reach out to me as well if they want an extra set of eyes to look over and provide some feedback. In some years, we've been able to have a community volunteer come in as well and provide some additional essay feedback. So it does exist. It's just a matter of students have to, if they ask, they can get the help. We'll probably try and come up with a little more streamlined process next year, because this year I'm glad all students took advantage of it, but I definitely got more requests than I have in the past. So I need to figure out a more fair and equitable way to make myself available to students for that. But it's good they're asking the questions.
You're in high demand, Steve. You're very, you are such a helpful college advisor. We're
Thank
really
you.
grateful to have you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Our next question is, how important do you think demonstrated interest is? Not all families can afford to visit all the schools.
Great question. So some schools consider demonstrated interest. I would say it seems to correlate a little bit more with private schools. But something that has, I guess we'll talk how things were, and then we'll post-pandemic on it.
Could I interrupt you really quick? Just because I have a question. What is demonstrated interest?
Oh, good question. I tried to find that first for people.
Yeah.
So, demonstrated interest is things that you do to show a school that you not just want to attend, but are serious about attending and likely to attend if they accept you. And in the past, traditional ways to demonstrate interest would entail going to the campus on a formal visit, connecting and emailing the admissions rep with questions. If they were doing a presentation in the area, possibly going to that, attending their virtual session, stuff like that. Obviously, during COVID, people couldn't travel as much. And since then, colleges have become aware of the fact that there's so many other ways students can show demonstrated interest without ever literally setting a foot on campus during the application process. Because you're right, a lot of people can't afford it, or still have some safety concerns with heavy travel. So you can sign up for a lot of colleges doing virtual visits. They are doing a lot of virtual admissions events. You could sign up for some of their presentations as ways for them to see that you're engaged, and not just sign up, make sure you actually log in, ask a question throughout so they know you didn't just put their Zoom on and then to go do something else in the background. What you can do when you are getting into junior and senior year, it's open to all grades, but I know juniors and seniors care more about the school visits when they come to our campus. Definitely come down to the Career Center or go on the Zoom virtual call, whatever it's going to look like in the future. If there's a school you're interested in that's not coming to visit us, reach out to check with me, see if they have a regional admissions rep you can reach out to say, hi, I'm interested in your school. I see you're not coming to San Mateo. Are you doing anything else in our area? And even if they're not, you've at least kind of opened that door and showed that you have some interest. And then hopefully they would suggest some alternate events if there are none locally.
Okay, next question. There has been a lot of buzz about schools, some UCs included, taking measures to protect their yield. Can you explain this and give us your insight? And do you think colleges do this? And is it ethical or fair to do this?
I guess I'll first define yield for anyone who's not sure what that is. So yield kind of refers to if I'm running a college admissions office, let's say for every 100 students that I admit to the school, if I can confidently say 75 are going to accept that offer, then I have a 75% yield. So certainly colleges, they have years of data. COVID messed it up a little bit, obviously, but they have years of data that kind of show what is a typical yield, which helps them for planning and such. So as far as, I'm sorry, was the question about are colleges manipulating yield?
Yeah, there's about taking measures to protect their yield.
Gotcha. So, it is certainly in a university's best interest to have some accurate idea of what kind of yield they're going to get so that they don't over admit people. Rarely this happens, but if a school miscalculates their yield, and I'm running it and I think I'm going to get 75 yeses, but I get a 95% yes rate, then all of a sudden I have a big housing crunch on campus. I guess it would depend as far as whether it's ethical or not. A lot of it would depend on what kind of steps a school is taking. Like they are not supposed to legally be communicating with other schools to see where else a student is getting accepted or not. That's not supposed to factor into their decision at all. But, you know, if they're a school that might take into account demonstrated interest, like that's not necessarily unethical for them to factor in, so they have a better idea of who is likely to accept. You know, I think a lot of it probably just depend on a case-by-case basis what kind of techniques the school is using to see if anything's crossing any ethical lines. But that's kind of a little bit of why they do concern themselves with yield.
Yeah, well, I think I'll be honest, as a parent, the perception honestly is that they protect their yield by declining some of the overqualified students because they think, oh, we're just a safety school sort of thing, right? So then they say, I mean, I'm just telling you as a parent, that's what I know, or what I've thought, and what other parents that I've talked to have thought, is that schools, if you're overqualified, will actually say, oh, we're not going to accept them because.
That can happen. And that's where demonstrated interest can come into play, because they see that you've made a genuine good faith effort to the school. They could be a little more confident you're going to attend. You know, whether it's ethical or not, I guess that's a bigger, complex philosophical question. You know, if they're not colluding with other schools and they're on their own making that decision, it's not illegal. I get the ethics can be questionable. That was an issue before I got into this field. There was a time where when students were filling out FAFSA, colleges would see where of the 10 schools the student listed, where they were on the list. So sometimes there were stories back then of a school, if they didn't see themselves in the top 3, not accepting someone. Thankfully, colleges are not able to see any other school on your FAFSA or DREAM Act application these days. So there's been some steps to mitigate that.
Okay. Okay, the next question kind of ties into this whole thing, maybe a little bit about yield. What's your take on the current issue regarding UC Berkeley? If they have to reduce their enrollment, how will that affect current juniors or sophomores? Have you heard about this?
Yeah, so I do not envy the job the people at Berkeley have ahead of them. So let me give a brief background for anyone who's just finding out for the first time. So a couple of weeks ago, maybe not a couple, might have been a week ago, very recent actually. Very recent. A court up in Alameda County ruled that Berkeley's overall enrollment number cannot cap whatever number it was in I think it was the 2020-2021 school year, which is completely thrown things for a loop. The reason they ruled that is because Berkeley was looking to expand some of the buildings on campus. It was not going to increase enrollment at all. I think it was going to be an extremely minimal increase of like 30, nothing too large. But some Berkeley residents of the city of Berkeley complained. They argued, they felt it was going to lead to higher enrollment. They felt that the environmental study UC Berkeley did not adequately address requirements of an environmental study. So the judge said, Berkeley, you cannot expand your enrollment until this thing has gone through its improper, court cycle. And the problem on the Berkeley side, not just is that they have to accept less students, but I mean, they're not going to kick out any students already there, of course. And they already did their graduate admissions for the fall, sending out those decisions. So they're in a bind. The only practical way they can get to that number is to decrease essentially the number of acceptance they send out. Now, Governor Newsom has intervened to the best of his ability. He's trying to get a higher state court to jump in and do emergency injunction, but that may not happen in time. He's also trying to get this California legislature to pass a law that would change the requirements for public colleges for their environmental process, but that very well may not pass in time. So that's the background. As far as my thoughts, I've got thoughts. So, I mean, I grew up in an area that was one town over from like a major tourist destination. So, I mean, we had yes, the tourists were not always the most fun or pleasant people to go along with, but they were also the backbone of our economy. So, we kind of just dealt with that. We knew that came with the territory of living there. And if we didn't like it, you can leave. And the people in Berkeley who are running a lawsuit, I get not everybody is in a financial circumstance to just move or leave. But the people behind the lawsuit, I think, are people of more financial means who have a lot more of that flexibility, so to speak. If you're living in a touristy area or an area like a college town, that kind of comes with the territory. So I don't like the lawsuit. I kind of make an exception in my thought process of that for people who live in Hawaii, because I know a lot of tourists there have done things disruptive to the ecosystem. But outside that, I feel like, you know where you live, you know what the backbone of your economy is. So I don't like the lawsuit. And I can't argue the legal merits of it. They very well might have a legal leg to stand on. But in terms of how it means to the Berkeley students, that's probably what you care more about than my legal opinion. I think we're going to see Berkeley likely have an extremely large waitlist this year, because I don't think they want to totally close the door on those students they could have admitted. So if they get to the middle to late March and this thing is still lingering in court, I think they will. The number of students they would have accepted, I'm sure they will put a lot in the wait list, because if the court overrules it with enough time that they can still take those students in, they definitely will want to try and do that. So I think we'll see a very large wait list this year for Berkeley.
Huh.
That's probably a really long-winded answer, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that just makes me want to ask the next question, which I'm going to ask. So if all these students get waitlisted and then they feel like, well, I got to accept somewhere, right? But then Berkeley comes back and says, now you're in. Does that how that works? Or do they just wait to see if Berkeley takes them? So
in general, not just Berkeley, anytime a school does not accept you but offers you a spot on the wait list, and you take that spot on the wait list, the general advice always is to assume you're not going to get off the wait list and look at the other schools that did accept you and see which opportunity is the best fit for you based on desire, cost, things like that. If you get off the wait list at a later point in time, then you have a bigger decision to make. Do you go with the school you now committed to, or do you switch over to this waitlist school? That's what I'm saying, though. You're gonna rationally, I think most people will say, okay, well, then I'll pick another school. And then if Berkeley comes back and says, oh, you're in, then they have to go back to the other school to say they're out. And so it's just like this trickle down effect, right? Where all these other schools then are going to be like, oh gosh, Berkeley's taking all these people off their wait list. And now they're getting all these people saying no at the last minute. It could, yeah, you're right. Definitely could have a very residual effect there across the board. If you do get on the wait list and you're waiting to see if you get off, pending a court thing, you do have until May 1st to make up your mind with the other schools that accepted you. You generally are not going to get your deposit to another school back, though, if you get off the wait list. But hopefully the courts will move quicker than, what are we now, February? So hopefully they move on this within the next 2 months. I forgot about the deposit. I do remember seeing that come up with my oldest. You do have to put money down. That does play a role. Okay. Okay. We have 3 more questions, but I'm just going to get to those quick. And they're actually all AP questions. What if my student is unable to get into an AP choice due to space limitation? Do they have an option to take it at a community college, or what are the other options? Sure. So you could do a community college course. It wouldn't technically be an AP, but an AP is meant to be a college level type course. So a CSM course would obviously be a college level course. So that's an option that exists for you. If nothing else fits the schedule, you can always ask your counselor to bring that up when they're writing the letter to your school as well, that mentions, what's extenuating circumstances you as an individual may have had. Okay. And are honors courses or AS courses considered the same as an AP course in terms of academic rigor? If not, how are they different? Generally, they're not given some places might give them a bump, but APs usually carry a bit more weight in that. a little more, we'll say, standardization, if you will, I guess, among the AP courses. So there's a little bit more like, you could say, college level consistency across the board. By the same token, at least for us, the way we run courses here, I guess it could be different at different high schools. Our honors and AS courses are more often coming up in the freshman, sophomore year, it seems like, for a lot of students. Language is a little bit of an exception. Then junior, senior kind of becomes AP, which tends to carry a bit more weight, both on the course level, but also the time of year of your school year you're taking that course.
Okay. But like the language, right? Those honors classes, they have an AP test that follow them if you choose to take the AP class, and that's.
Oh yeah, there is
Okay.
like the AP Spanish language.
Yeah.
The French more, but yeah.
Okay. And how do APs get graded? Are there assessments and tests throughout the year, or just a final test at the end of the year?
So that final AP exam doesn't really factor into your actual letter grade within the course. So it is entirely upon what the teacher runs in the course. Not being an AP teacher myself, I don't know for sure to what degree they have localized control over assessment methods versus what's required of the course. I know the course requires certain content and a preferred order for that content, things like that. I don't want to get the wrong answer. I have to defer to the teacher on if there's like a standardized approach to assessment. I feel like there'd be a lot of, I suspect a lot of local like control over that as far as how much of it's testing versus writing for the subject and all that stuff.
Okay. Well, that's it for our questions this evening. I'd like to thank you, Steve, so much for taking all those questions and your presentation this evening. It was very informative. It seems like we can never get enough of how do I get my kids into college? But I do want to remind everybody that we also have a career center, and there are other options if your student decides that college isn't for them. They might not want to take on that student debt and just go right into work, which is also a good option these days. Which we've learned through COVID, paying contractors as much money as we've had to. So that's another thing to think about. Once again, thank you, Steve, and thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Armando, for being our Spanish interpreter extraordinaire. And everybody have a great evening.
Thank you. Have a good night, all.